Thank you, Acting President. I rise also to support the motion put forward by the Honourable Clara Undrich. Thank her for putting the motion forward on such an important issue, and heartily agree with the celebration of, in particular, the record spending by the McGowan government in terms of mental health, and also in terms of our embracing innovation and education to support the mental health of Western Australians. It is a topic close to my own heart and very personal, and I'm sure that it's the case for pretty much everyone in the room, in that you could in some way personally connect or be personally connected to someone who has at some stage of their life or has ongoing mental health challenges. For me, as I've mentioned in the past, that manifests in the form of anxiety and depression, and also in the form of a diagnosis of adult ADD. Now, these are things that I do not necessarily believe that people could have openly admitted to in a context such as this in the past. And I think that is such an encouraging development that I can say that openly to my colleagues in the context of the Legislative Council chamber, and feel no fear of repercussions or anyone undermining my credibility because of those particular mental health challenges that I face, or people around you, or perhaps even yourself, may be facing on a daily basis. In terms of my own discussion about mental health here, I'd like to focus on youth education and some of the regional spending that the McGowan government is contributing. I'll just note a couple from the 2022-23 state budget, because these ones are particularly important to me. One is the $18.5 million being spent to expand child and adolescent mental health services across regional WA. I'm a regional member. The spending in the regions is very important to me, and I'm always paying very close attention to those and making sure that our regions aren't getting overlooked or left behind. There's also the $5.1 million to continue mental health emergency telehealth services, and that's all about ensuring our regional residents can access mental health services. It's particularly important. Out in the regions, as we all know, we rely a lot more heavily on telehealth and apps and internet services to access a lot of essential health services. I noted yesterday in the Honourable Donna Farrago, when she was talking about mental health services, and she's out on urgent parliamentary business at the moment, but when she was talking about access to services in terms of child health yesterday, she gave the example of someone living in the metro environment and having to travel to another suburb metro, and it really made me reflect on how intensely those challenges are amplified for regional people who have to travel hours upon hours to access those services, if they get the opportunity to access them at all. And it requires a far greater effort and commitment for regional people to be able to access those services. One of the great things that the McGowan government is doing is an announcement made by our Education Minister, the Honourable Sue Ellery, in March earlier this year, about a new fee-free course, so the mental health practice skills set course that is now free even for people who already exist in the workforce. And that is all about building capacity in our community to make sure there's people out there with the skills and attributes that can help support people who are experiencing mental health challenges. I think this is an excellent development, because one of the greatest challenges to people skilling up and being able to provide the services that we need, or to fill that workforce need, is the barrier of cost. And some of those people who are most valuable in delivering mental health support are often people who are experiencing also financial or socioeconomic barriers. They have that direct on-ground experience that enables them to relate directly to people who are experiencing specific mental health challenges and life experiences. And it's so important that we have such a diverse workforce to meet with and engage with people who are experiencing mental health challenges, and that people can connect with people that they can directly relate to. It makes being open and communicating about those challenges so much easier for those people. The other great thing that has been announced by Minister Ellery of recent times is the election commitment of $42.2 million over 4 years for the employment of an additional 100 full-time psychologists in schools. This is an excellent initiative and a great recognition by Minister Ellery and the McGowan government of the need to address these things within the school and educational context to make sure that our young people are being looked after and that we meet them in their area of need in the educational context, where they're typically most open to that. As my own experience as a teacher, and I guess perhaps also having been someone who has experienced mental health challenges, often one of the educational barriers that my students were experiencing were actually mental health, but they didn't have the personal insight or the emotional intelligence to necessarily recognise that in themselves. And so part of my teaching was gradually coaching these people to recognise what they were experiencing was actually mental health challenges and then connecting them to the appropriate services. There's always barriers to young people recognising those things, and they come in all different forms and shapes and forms, and some of them are maybe families that don't necessarily want to talk about mental health or lack of emotional intelligence. It's a whole range of things, but the educational context is such an opportune environment to address mental health conditions. I'm also really pleased to note the development of respectful relationships teaching support programs in schools as well, with the great collaboration between our Minister Simone McGurk and Minister Sue Ellery. I think that respectful relationships teaching support program, whereby teachers and staff are being delivered that training so that it becomes completely embedded in the way that they deliver education and support to students in schools. It is also particularly important at the moment with the proliferation of social media identities, perhaps let's call them, the likes of Andrew Tate, who's having a significant impact on the thinking of our young male community. Respectful relationships is an excellent counterculture to that, and some of the media chatter that I've been listening to recently is about young people are engaging and hearing that kind of content, and which some might define as toxic masculinity, but I can tell you right now I don't like that term because I think of it more as toxic socialisation. I don't like the term because I saw it so often, particularly in a school context, young men feeling defensive when they hear that because they hear the word toxic and they hear masculine and they think that we're saying males are toxic, and that is not at all what we want our young men to think. We love our young men, we want them to do well and to feel equally valued across the whole community. But I think that this respectful relationships investment is profoundly important as that counterculture to some of the toxic content and socialisation that our young people are experiencing in social media platforms. And I think that's a great way of schools also taking some responsibility, because we have to be mindful of the fact also that it is also education that brought a lot of technology into young people's lives and the insistence of using things like iPads in part of school delivery. And while they can be incredibly helpful learning tools and even great for lessening the load in the school bag with books and things, it does also open up the world of the internet and some of the darker aspects of that. And our young people get very little respite these days from all of that information, some of it useful and some of it profoundly damaging. And I would put Andrew Tate in that category. You know, he's there designed to generate outrage from people, and that, you know, that self-perpetuating outrage from people. It keeps filtering through that algorithm back into our young people's world. So I'm really grateful that we have programs like Respectful Relationships that allow our young men in education institutions to recognise that that's unhealthy. And believe me, young men are saying that. They are recognising that it is unhealthy, and there's also some schools out there writing to parents and encouraging parents to talk about that kind of social media and encourage some critical thinking in their young people to you know, question, you know, who's being served by that kind of platform, and is it healthy, and what do I really think about that, and what's important to me. So I really do congratulate the McGowan government and the Honourable Clara Undrich for her motion and fully support the motion.
I give the call to the Honourable Dr Brian Walker.
There's in the few minutes left to us in this moment,